So welcome, friends, to Midweek Experiments in Faithfulness. This is a weekly 1-hour facilitated spiritual practice with a Quaker flavor and an experimental ethos. My name is Jen Higgins Newman, and I'm the program manager at Beacon Hill Friends House. We're a Quaker Center for Learning in Action and a residential community of about 20 people who live according to Quaker values. Tonight, we have Tema Okun with Catching Our Conditioning, how to catch or notice and meet our fear-based cultural conditioning into racism, sexism, gender, class, and other oppressions with compassion in order to deepen our relationships with others, ourselves, and God. Tema has spent over 30 years working and learning alongside leaders, organizations, schools, and community focused on racial justice and equity. She is white and Jewish, a writer, artist, and poet, deeply committed to racial justice and Palestinian solidarity. She lives in Durham, North Carolina, where she is fortunate to live in and among a beloved community. Her current project is deepening her ability to love herself, her neighbor as herself. She is finding the instruction easy and the follow-through challenging, given how we live in a culture that is afraid to help us do either or both. You can check out Tema's work at dismantlingracism.org. And welcome, we're happy that you've joined us. And Tema, now to you.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. And I'm really excited to be here. It's really amazing and wonderful to see so many people who I know. Of course, the pressure, I feel it rising, and I'm very, very happy to be here. So we have a short time together, so I'm gonna dive right in. I'm gonna ask us just to take another breath. And then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna tell you a story, and from that story, say some things and then invite you all to talk to each other. So some of you who know me have heard the story before. So I'm going to come at this from a race lens. And the story I'm going to tell is when I was in high school, I went to Chapel Hill High, which was a school that desegregated and brought together students from the white high school, which was Chapel Hill High, and the black high school, Lincoln High, into a new school called Chapel Hill High. And most of the identity of the white school was preserved while the identity and the legacy of Lincoln High was erased. And so, and most of the black teachers were fired, and that was happening all across the South as schools desegregated. And white teachers, often many unqualified, were hired. So that was the context in which the story takes place. And so the students at Chapel Hill High, the black students were protesting, were doing sit-ins in the hall, and we formed a group called the Race Council, where white students and black students would meet together in each other's homes, and we would talk to each other. And so one night we were meeting in my home, and I lived in a ranch house that had a basement that was where we would meet, where the TV was and where my mother would have friends over and things. So we were meeting down there, and a young black man named Sylvester was saying to me, "You're racist." And I was going, "No, I'm not." He was going, "Yes, you are." And I was going, "No, I'm not." And he was going, "Yes, you are." And that was our conversation. And so finally at one point I just said, "Okay, I have to go upstairs and get refreshments." And I went upstairs to get refreshments, and my mother could hear us. And she turned to me and she said, "You need to get a grip on yourself. You're a white girl being raised in a racist country. You're racist, deal with it." And that's where my memory stops. I don't remember if I then walked down to tell Sylvester that my mother actually told me that he was indeed right. But I do remember that my mother gave me this incredible gift of inviting me to consider, rather than spending all my time defending against what I wasn't, was to consider what it meant to be racist in this culture. And so I've spent my lifetime really coming to understand what she meant, or trying to make meaning out of what she told me. And this is some of the meaning that I've made. First of all, that I have been conditioned to racism my whole life. And even though I was still only a teenager, I was breathing the air of white supremacy from the moment I was born. I wasn't born racist, and I have been invited into my racist conditioning since the moment I took my first breath with my wailing cry. And I want to say that the wonderful Sherry Huber describes conditioning as the internal programming by which an individual is turned into a person who will fit into a given culture. So I'm talking about, and some of you, I invited people to read the white supremacy culture article ahead of time. So that article is really about all the different invitations that we are given, all of us, regardless of race, to accommodate white supremacy culture. And some of us are, those of us who are white are invited in, and those of us who are Black or Indigenous or people of color are either invited to assimilate in some kind of way, or not invited at all, or violated altogether. So they're complicated relationships with this culture and the conditioning. So my mother was telling me that I'm a white woman deeply conditioned by a white supremacy culture that wants and depends on me to participate in whiteness as a white young woman. What this means is that I, even as a young white teenager, was taught to believe inside my very bones a lot of things that aren't true by a culture that wants me to participate in white supremacy and racism. So, for example, some of the things that I have been taught are that I am both normal and I am better, which is quite a dilemma. And this shows you how devious white supremacy is, that it can tell us both these things. I'm both normal and I'm better because I'm white. I am perfect, although perfection is always elusive and it's never defined by me, because at the same time I'm supposed to be perfect and normal, I am never good enough. I've been taught I'm in control, or at least I should be. I've been taught I'm qualified to do things, that I have no idea how to do. I've been taught I should hide my not knowing and any shame and fear associated with not knowing. I've been taught that to make a mistake is to be a mistake. I've been taught to be afraid and to never admit that I'm afraid. I've been taught to defend against or deny anything that suggests I'm not good enough, even though I've been taught that I should be comfortable, and if I'm uncomfortable, I must find somebody to blame. I've been taught I should help those less fortunate than me, even if they don't want my help, or the help I'm offering is useless because I'm not actually in authentic relationship with those I claim to be helping and know nothing about them beyond my characterization of them as somehow bereft. I've been taught that belonging is best defined by identifying who doesn't belong. I've been taught that my body is perfect and innocent, or if it isn't, it should be, while Black and brown bodies are dangerous and criminal. I've been taught that I should know the answer the right way, and that to admit I don't know is a betrayal of professionalism, which is very much about whiteness, and it's a betrayal of myself, so it's better to pretend I know than to admit that I don't or couldn't possibly. And I've been taught to collude in racism and white supremacy because that's how I belong. Or if I decide to be a good white person, to collude in racism and white supremacy to prove how I'm better than other white people. So this is what I've been taught. This is what those of us who've been born into white bodies have been taught. And some version of this is what we've been taught in terms of the ways in which we might belong to the dominant culture based on our gender or our class or our able-bodiedness or our sexuality. So it's how white supremacy culture works, is that it's in its dominant cultureness, it extends beyond just race. So I want to, I've said a lot, I want us just to take a breath again. And now I want you to consider, what have you been taught? So if you were born into a Black or a brown body or a mixed roots body, you're invited to either consider what you've experienced about what those of us who are white have been taught, or you consider what you've been taught about being born into your body. And nobody's required to share. What I want to ask you to do is to think about what you've been taught, and as it occurs to you, if you're willing, to share it in the chat. All of us can take a look at the chat as people share there, and then I will say a few more things. So what have you been taught? I have a right to be anywhere I want to be. I'm good and my good intentions are enough. I was taught that as a white male, others should listen. I was taught that white is normal. I was taught it's my job and I have the ability to make it easier for people. I've been taught that some level of success is guaranteed. I've been taught I should be nice to people of color, that I'm race neutral, that I don't have to think about my race. It's not my problem. Been taught it's a sign of weakness to ask for help. I was taught that I was smart, while Black and Puerto Ricans were stupid. I've been taught that I'm smart and capable. And so what I want to say here is that I'm happy when any of us are taught that we're smart and we're capable. I think the challenge of racist conditioning and white supremacy conditioning is that I'm smart and I'm capable more than other people. Certainly more than people of color, but generally more than other people, sort of as a unique individual. So it's not just that I'm smart and capable along with everyone else, it's that I am uniquely smart and capable. And that's where it starts to get differentiated in ways that are harmful. Okay, so here's someone who's, I assume, of Asian descent saying I'm interchangeable with every other Asian. Yes, that's what this culture teaches us, for sure. I'm taught that because I've had Black friends, it means I'm not racist. Okay. So these are very good examples. Let's take another breath. And so here's a question for you. And this is what we're going to do in small groups. I want you to talk to each other about the cost of that conditioning. What's the direct cost to you? And so I'm going to give you an example. And so one of the ways that my conditioning shows up is that I often interrupt or I take charge in a situation in the belief that I understand something or I know something or I know how to explain something better than my colleague of color. And I've been known to do this even when the subject at hand is the lived experience of Black people or Indigenous people or people of color. So I interrupt in my urgency to explain what I know better than anyone else. And this kind of interruption, based on this internalized sense I have that I know best, ends up being not just a behavior that is harmful and violating to my colleagues of color, but it's the same behavior I have with my white colleagues, with my friends, and then with myself. So I start to come at others and myself with this insistent knowing, this desire to set people straight, rather than to make space to allow the wisdom of my colleagues or even of myself to arise from a place of not knowing. My conditioning into my own sense that I'm qualified to set somebody straight or to fix them or to save them costs me a lot. It costs me authentic relationships across lines of race. It costs me authentic relationships within the white community. And it costs me an authentic relationship with myself as I'm continually trying to prove to myself that this intuitive sense I have that I know how to save and fix even myself. So the ways I think about myself, if I'm feeling better or more qualified or more entitled, these ways of thinking and feeling shut me off from what's actually true. And what's actually true is that I feel some fear about not knowing how to respond to somebody else's fear. I'm afraid of not being enough or not knowing enough or not being the right kind of white person in that moment. And in my fear, I act towards others and towards myself with a lot of righteous aggressiveness and defensiveness and denial. I interrupt, I fail to breathe, I take charge, I leave little room for others or even truthfully for myself. So I can tell you stories of pushing colleagues aside to take their place, interrupting, repeating what people have said very well and in ways that don't need repeating, and that this is my pattern over and over and over again. It's my conditioning. Again, I'm going to quote Sherry Huber that once we leave ourselves in this way, we're bound to suffer until we return to ourselves. And so one of the ways that I know that this is happening, that I'm living out of this conditioned pattern, is that my body tells me. My breath becomes more shallow. I start to talk like this. I start to talk really fast. I feel anxiety raising my chest. My body tenses up. I feel restless and agitated. And I start to have this, and it's like, no, let me just say that you've got, here's what's true. And I start to show up like that. So I want to give you a chance to think about a conditioned pattern, one that you know gets in the way of your relationship with others across lines of race. It impacts your relationships with everyone and with yourself. If you are Black, Indigenous, or a person of color, if you want to think about how a pattern that interrupts across race, that you experience white people doing to you, you can do that. If you would like to if you'd like to think about, again, one of your dominant culture identities and how those patterns show up in you, and that way you're free to do that.